So as expressed when I did the unboxing of my Imperfect Foods, we had talked about using the Arborio rice for a risotto, which is the only rice you can use to make a risotto. People will tell you you can use other rices. They're liars. Don't listen to them. We took those red bell peppers, and those are diced up. All of those shallots are diced up. And then this was actually a rotisserie chicken that came from the store, and all we did was shred it and then put the bones themselves into water to simmer down into a stock, which will be used with the arborio, and the rest of this is going to go into the rice itself. And then we're going to add a little something, little sweet Riesling to it as we go. So, oh yes, and then we're also going to take this onion, and it's just going to get tossed into that stock as well. And the reason the onion gets tossed in last is why?
The flavor will cook out if you put it in too soon, and it'll actually just be like bark. You may as well just put noodles in there that look like onion. So you just cut it up. You can actually leave the skins. Some people don't like it, but it doesn't really matter. You can actually leave the skins, doesn't really matter, and just toss the whole thing in.
Because we're just using it to flavor the stock, right? We're not actually going to use it any further than just kind of simmering it off a little bit.
Yeah, and whatever's left over, you could use it. It just doesn't have any flavor because you're taking this much flavor and putting it in this much space. So there's just nothing left in the onion.
Gotcha. Since we talked about making the stock, we're going to show you guys what it looks like here, and it's just the bones of the chicken in some water, and then it's the shallot skins, because the skin of the produce has really good flavor. It's also the tops of the bell peppers that we didn't dice up to use, and then that whole onion that you saw that was cut up. And this is where you want it to be at as far as like a simmer goes, because what it's doing is it's pulling all the flavor from all those ingredients out, and it's condensing it. And we let this go for what? How long do we simmer this for?
About an hour.
An hour. And then you'll have chicken stock. And you'll be able to use as much of it as you want. Anything you have left over, you can freeze and use for later. So just like before, we took the pan and we got it hot and brought it up to temperature. And then we dropped in 2 tablespoons of butter. This is a salted butter, but you can use unsalted if you want to. And so we're just going to let that kind of move around, coat the pan. Then we'll show you what we're going to do once this is all nice and melted. So the first thing that goes in are the shallots. We did 4 shallots in this particular one. And shallots have like a super onion flavor without actually being an onion necessarily. They're a cousin to an onion, correct?
Kinda. It's like having this much onion flavor in this much space.
So 2 onions worth of flavor in a tablespoon's worth of space. That's a good way of saying what a shallot is. And so we're going to let that go for a little bit, and it'll cause the shallots to sweat, which will cause them to release their flavor and all of their oils and their juices into the butter. And then that's going to get mixed in with rice and some other things. So we've given the shallots about 2 minutes or so to sweat, and you can see where they've started to change color. And now we're going to add in the bell pepper, and not only does bell pepper have a really good flavor, but it's going to retain a good portion of its color too, which will stay red when we make the risotto.
It'll even give some of that red color, almost a pink color, to the rice itself.
Oh, that's really cool. I did not know that. Yeah. So red bell pepper will lend a tint to surrounding foods. Very cool. Good to know. So we're going to cook this down for, what, like 4 or 5 minutes or so before we start getting the rice in there. So now you can see where the bell peppers actually kind of change color a little bit. And we're getting ready to add the rice. And so do you toast the rice when you're doing arborio rice? Since I do that with a lot of, like, when I make Spanish rice, I'll toast it.
Yeah, it's more of a, you put it in, you get it mixed around, and then you start adding your liquid. And when you add the liquid, you do it in little amounts so that the rice doesn't stick together. Arborio rice, the outer part is going to cook before the inner part. So you have to keep it moving in order to Make sure fluid is constantly moving around, and to keep the arborio from sticking together and gluing into like a single ball.
So you have to keep it moving to stop it from binding itself together.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, you have to stand here and stir and stir and stir. I'm sorry, I will move out of your way. As you ladle the stock into it. Is that correct?
Yep.
So first few ladles of stock.
You want it to be about level with your rice and everything else. So I'm going to keep adding stock a little at a time, keeping it stirring, and I'm trying to get like as much stock in there as I can.
Okay. And so this is really the labor intensive part of creating risotto, is the constant ladle and stir.
Yep. It takes a while.
Okay.
20-30 minutes of just standing here stirring. Some
So,
people let it sit longer, but it's where you start getting clumps.
So, ladies, if you have a husband that, or a boyfriend, or anyone that you ask, to open jars for you, they're the person you want standing here stirring this. So we've added quite a bit of stock to it now, and it's kind of come level with the rest of the ingredients, so it makes almost like a straight, it almost levels everything off, correct?
Right. Yeah. Because I'm going to stir this. Anything that's on top is going to go on bottom. It's going to be moved around. Everything's going to be stirred. So don't feel like, oh, well, this area is going to be hotter than this area, and you just keep it moving.
And we're keeping this on a low heat so that we don't burn anything, right? We want a slow evaporation and absorption process. Is that correct?
Right.
So for my particular stove, it's on a 4, but I have a glass top. And so if you have straight coils, or if you're cooking with gas, or you have induction, you're just going to cook with whatever to be kind of your low setting. You want the small bubbles and not like a big steam or hiss or burn, correct?
Correct.
So we've let this cook a little bit, and most of the liquid has kind of evaporated out of it. And now you can see where it's kind of gotten thicker. The rice has swelled up just a little bit. So now we're going to add more liquid to it. We're going to bring it back to the same level that we had before, right?
Yep.
And keep it moving as you're adding the liquid.
It's just, trying to keep it moving. I'm just moving it around so I can see how much I've already got in there and make sure I'm not adding too much, because you can have pools that are raised up and now all of a sudden you've got too much liquid and you're just boiling off flavor that you're missing.
Okay. So we've gone through adding stock about 4 times now, and there's a pro tip to cooking arborio rice and making risotto out of it, and that is when you squeeze the rice, you see these, that's way out of focus, hold on, there. So you see these little hard balls of starch inside the rice itself, and what you're looking for is you want those to get smaller. You want them to be kind of tiny little dots, right?
Pretty close.
Pretty close. And so we're looking for them to be smaller than that. That one broke in 4. We're looking for them to be smaller than that. And that's basically your internal rice timer. Now this trick only works with arborio rice, correct?
Correct.
So don't use it with your other rice. Don't try to squeeze your other rice and say, oh, well, the starches are broken down. It doesn't work with them. Okay, so what we were talking about with that rice tip, we've added stock about 5 times now. And you're going to squeeze the rice, and there we go. And so you can see how, well, if my camera would focus, there. So you can see the 3 little tiny white dots inside there. At least I can see them. Hopefully you guys can too. And so because of that, now the next addition that we're going to do is we're actually going to add a Riesling, right?
And we're going to let this stock cook out first. We're going to try and get it so where you can see the metal, you can see how it wants to pull in, but it's just too dense. And that's when you know that you've got as much absorbed into it as you can. And then you want to add, if you want to add any extra flavors, this is where you would do it, like little bits of rosemary, let's say a bay leaf, or not bay leaf, basil,
thyme, just any sort of herb that you might want to add.
Fresh herbs.
All right, so we're going to grab the Riesling, and this is a Chateau St. Michael Sweet Riesling, correct?
Right.
And of course, like any good cooks, you should always sample what you're going to feed to other people because you don't want to give them bad alcohol. So in it goes. And you don't have to worry about wine flaring up like you would see like with other alcohols,
Bourbons
right?
or anything like that. No, it's too much water content, not enough alcohol that will cause flashing. You're not dealing with like a dry, like a stir fry that would do it. In this, we're just taking the liquid, we're kind of stirring it around, and it's going to absorb into all the other water base here. So all the rice and everything is going to pick up a lot of that wine flavor that you want.
And now we're adding the wine at the end to give it sort of a stronger wine flavor, whereas we could have added it at the beginning and it would have had a lighter wine flavor. Is that right?
Right. And it really would lighten up. Like, let's say you have a wine that's got a really strong, potent flavor. You would want to do it at the beginning with it, like, say, the shallots to flash the pan. But this is a really light, sweet, and it will complement the onions and the bell pepper. So it's not really like we have to fight it at all throughout the cooking method.
So we're really building layers of sweet. Shallots, bell pepper, white wine.
Right.
Awesome. And now that all that wine is mostly absorbed, we're adding the chicken. And this was just a pre-cooked, store-bought rotisserie chicken. Don't go to the trouble of trying to roast your own chicken unless you want to be really super fancy and impress a lot of people. Because, I mean, why? You can buy a whole chicken for $6 and roast it yourself, or you can buy a roasted chicken for $6 and have half the work done for you. And so we've added everything, just all the meat. The whole thing was shredded, white meat, dark meat, and then you saw even some of the gelatinous kind of fat that was still in there that had started to cool.
A lot of times we call that meat jello, and it's actually a lot of flavor gets packed into that meat jello. It's actually going to keep your rice tender, and it'll it really does add like salt. It's mostly just the water that got bound up in the proteins, and so it's really worth keeping.
So a lot of people like to throw that out, but you add it because it brings that much more flavor to the dish that you're making.
Yeah.
Sweet. So the next step after this is probably going to be to plate the sucker up and serve it to people, isn't it?
Yeah.
Awesome. And this is a really dense, like, rib sticking dish. So you can literally just make chicken risotto, feed it to people, and call it good. It's a great one pan or one pot meal, so long as you're willing to put the time in.
Yeah.
So now that we've added everything to this, our wine, our shallots, our bell peppers, our chicken, all that good stuff, what's the very last step?
Last step is salt. And all starch products take up a lot of salt. The more starch you have, the more salt you need. In this case, a risotto will really soak up a lot of your starch. And
a lot of your salt.
a lot of your salt. And so what you do is you add the salt, you mix it around, get it all good and mixed, and then you taste it. If you can taste the salt, and this is kosher salt, not iodized salt. Iodized salt tastes like salt, but it's not actually salt. If you use kosher salt and you can actually taste the salt, you've got too much. It takes a lot of kosher salt to be able to taste it.
In other words, like two tablespoons would be fine, a cup, not so much.
Yeah.
And go light at first. You can always add more, but you can never take away. Is that right?
There are exceptions, but yes, you can't take away.
And then also important is make sure you taste it. Make sure that you've got your salt balance correct. See if you need any more, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've added all the salt that we wanted to, which we did add a little bit more salt even after what you guys saw we put in there. And we've tasted it. We've decided that the balance is where we want it. And so now we're just kind of showing you what it looks like finished. And you can see as it's being stirred, it's creating valleys. But it's not sticking to the bottom of the pan, which is where a lot of people go wrong with rice, is they get their pan too hot and it sticks and burns. And that adds a burnt flavor to the entire dish. And then you can see how thick it is and how it moves. So like if he shakes the pan, You can see it kind of jiggles like Jell-O, and that's what you're after with a risotto, right? You want that gelatinous kind of movement.
You want it to be dense, but you don't want it to be solid. Like if you go solid, it's dry.
It's too dry.
Everybody's gonna taste that.
Okay. And you can also see how it kind of grew inside the pan from where we started originally, and it's probably a good 3/4 of the way up the pan, whereas when we originally started adding all of our ingredients, the pan was dry. We didn't add anything else other than what you saw us put in here. So we didn't have anything made ahead of time and then threw it in real quick. Risotto takes too much work to actually do that.
Yeah.